Hi everyone, hoping that you all are well. For this discussion, we're going to be doing a reading from The Scotsman. The title of this article is The Hebridean Slaves, and slaves is in quotation marks for a reason, offered for £3 a head. And this was published in 2016, but of course this is referring to centuries past. So let's get started with this reading. Now, this article tells the story of an interesting individual going by the name of Sir Norman MacLeòid. And Sir Norman MacLeòid, of course, was of nobility based upon the Sir title. And so we're going to read this interesting story about the business endeavors of this Norman MacLeòid. And so this individual is from the MacLeòid clan. It indicates they were kidnapped from their beds and bundled on a boat in the dark of night and offered for sale for £3 a head. A total of 96 men, women, and children, about 20 of them between the ages of 6 and 10 years old, were the human cargo of the ship William in 1739. Now, of course, this is around another historic time frame. The vessel to take them on the first leg of their journey to the colonies of the America. But there's a little twist in the story. It indicates, but this boat was not to depart from the slave ports of West Africa, but instead from the Isle of Skye, after a plot was hatched by Sir Norman MacLeòid of Berneray to violently remove people from their homes. As you should recall, the Isle of Skye is one of the islands in the Hebrides, in other words, in Scotland. The boat shipwrecked off of Dungadee, hopefully that's the way you pronounce that, County Down, after a storm pushed the William, that's the ship, onto the rocks with those on board rounded up by the authorities. The article goes on to indicate the episode was to become known as the Ship of the People. Now, according to the narrative, Ulster magistrates became aware of the plight of the islanders and the plot to send them across the Atlantic. A letter from a Luke St. Lawrence of Dungadee to Alex Cunningham, the Scots collector at Port Patrick, written just days after the shipwreck, sheds light on the affair executed by Norman MacLeòid, son of Donald MacLeòid of Berneray, and William Davison, the ship's master. According to the letter, MacLeòid was to pay £5 for each of their freight to America, as he and Davison said, but he offered them to sail here for £3 each. The article goes on to indicate, he added, and this is in quotation marks, "I am sorry your country is so hard set for money that they have fallen on the guinea trade." As you might recall, the term guinea trade was used in the past to reference the slave trade. However, Dr. David Alstor, an expert in the links between the Highlands and the slave trade, said those on board the William would be sold into indentured labor as opposed to slavery. Several landowners in Skye had long been implicated in the dark episode of the Vessel of the Men. Yes, those in the Hebrides had long been implicated in this dynamic. And by the way, MacLeòid was a clan chief. It indicates key characters including Sir Alexander MacDonald, 9th Baronet of Sleat, long denied their role in the plot to forcibly move innocent islanders, some from Harris, remember the Isle of Harris, under the pretense that they were a parcel of convicts for transportation. And so these individuals who were mistaken for being victims of the Guinea trade were actual islanders from the Hebrides. And they were being transported under the pretense of them being convicts sentenced to transportation. In other words, deportation. Deportation out of Scotland into the Americas. It goes on to indicate, however, the true nature of the Williams voyage soon became apparent to those in Ulster. It goes on to indicate that in St. Lawrence's letter, he details how MacLeòid let them into the secret, that he had the consent of the heads of Skye to take away as many men, women, and children as he could provide shipping for, and carry them to America, or, according to this quotation, we suppose where else he pleased. MacLeòid carried with him a list of those he claimed had been convicted at their courts. But St. Lawrence said the passengers had been taken out of their beds or from about their labor, not one person in confinement or even tried before any court. Okay? And so this individual was using this pretense of court conviction or wrongdoing to support this deportation. It goes on to indicate it was impossible that the children on board could be found guilty of capital crimes, he added. The letter continues that it was all agreed, and that's in quotation marks, that those on board were forced out of their country, contrary to the law of all Christian nations. And so these individuals were being forcibly deported under the guise of being transported based upon conviction. It goes on to indicate MacLeòid and Davison made their escape with warrants issued against them by the local judiciary. And so this was a dynamic that was going on in Scotland where actual citizens were being kidnapped and forcibly deported out of the country in a penal colony dynamic. And so with respect to this situation, there were children involved, and the court identified that the children couldn't have possibly been guilty of these capital crimes, the same types of crimes you saw people being convicted of with respect to the Jacobites. The article goes on to indicate that the individual named Sir Norman MacLeòid later fled to the Netherlands. Now, some of the islanders decided to stay and settle in that area, but some other ones eventually made their way back home to the Isle of Skye. Continuing on, it indicates following news of the shipwreck, Lord MacDonald set to work vehemently denying his role in the Williams voyage. A series of letters, all held by Clan Donald Archive on Skye, shows how he had been involved in shipping around 30 thieves from Skye in previous years. But he claims McLeòid had falsified his role in the William affair. In letters to a John Mackenzie dated 1739, he defends himself from having any concern in that, in quotation marks, villainous attempt. He added, MacLeòid and I are mentioned in letters sent to Ireland as the persons who were to furnish the unhappy cargo of that ship. I can scarce believe Berneray was capable of writing so. A further letter adds, I was never so angry at myself as about this matter, and I must regret my folly as long as I have my senses. And then there is this Dr. Alstor. And it indicates Dr. Alstor described the Williams voyage as a disturbing episode in the exploitation of vulnerable people. He added, even as early as this, it shows how landowners could treat their tenants. It blows out the water romantic notion about the clan chief and his people. And so this sheds some light on the dynamics with the quote unquote American Indian clan chiefs who were selling out their people. So what we have here is this dynamic known as the common denominator. And apparently, Scots individuals were common denominators in these types of dynamics. These situations of convict transportation, these forced deportations of citizens under the guise of conviction, and running the Guinea trade, running slave plantations in the Americas, and also stepping in as descendants in terms of American Indians and negotiating treaties on behalf of the American Indians and what would have been considered the colonial entities at that time. And so the Scots were very busy with dealing in various areas of commerce, both legal and illegal, and also with selling out their countrymen, countrywomen, and children for personal gain. They were also instrumental in playing this shell game with respect to identities, creating new identities for people with respect to those who would be considered enslaved individuals. And so many individuals from Scotland ended up in this so-called Guinea trade, or this trade to the American plantations. And by doing this, their identities were changed from Scotsmen, Irishmen, to Africans. And finally, we have these mottos that are attached to Clan McLeòid. And so there are two mottos. One motto that we have previously discussed is this motto of hold fast. The other Clan McLeòid motto is that they shine and not burn. What's also noteworthy is that Clan McLeòid is supposed to be descended from none other than Olaf the Black.